I stood in the doorway, staring at the toilet brush she left for me, still wet from her own hands. The hallway light flickered behind me, casting shadows on the tiled floor where I used to read my grandson bedtime stories. "If you want to live here, start with the bathrooms," she'd said, not even flinching. After signing over 40% of the house, after letting them move in when they had nowhere else to go, after holding their baby when she wouldn't. I wasn't a mother-in-law anymore, I was the maid. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Elaine paused in the doorway, staring at the rubber gloves and bleach bottle resting on the chair. The small mocking gesture gnawed at her insides. Marcus's voice still lingered in the air. "If you want to stay here rent-free, earn it." The gloves weren't just a cleaning tool. They were a silent order, a declaration of her place here, a place she never agreed to. She didn't look up as Marcus and Mia passed her without a word. Their eyes trained on the floor, avoiding hers like they couldn't bear the thought of seeing her. Her breath hitched for a moment, but she steadied herself. The pressure in her chest had become familiar. It was anger, yes, but it was something else too. Something darker that brewed when you were treated like you didn't belong. The bathroom door clicked shut behind her with a sharpness that rattled her. The air was thick with bleach fumes and something more suffocating, silence. She picked up the gloves, her fingers tight against the rubber, and slipped them on. They didn't fit right. They were too loose at the wrists, too tight around her palms. The toilet sat there, unassuming. Yet its presence felt like a reminder of everything she couldn't change. With a deep exhale, she knelt. The cold tiles bit into her knees, a sharp contrast to the heat building in her chest. The cleaner fizzed against the porcelain, releasing a sharp scent that made her stomach tighten. She scrubbed mechanically, back and forth, feeling each bristle of the brush as if it were scraping the surface of her self-control. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of her movements, the steady, rhythmic strokes of the brush against the toilet. Each motion an attempt to purge herself of the emotions she couldn't voice. The liquid cleaner slid down the sides of the bowl, tracing a path that felt endless, like a trail that led to nowhere. But she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to stop. Her thoughts swirled, but they all circled back to one thing, her place, here. She was invisible, a mere shadow in a house that had no room for her. They didn't see her as a person. She was just an object, an obligation to tolerate until the next inconvenience arrived. She didn't matter. The brush clattered against the rim. She caught it with her hands, her palms slick with cleaner. For a moment, she thought about throwing it across the room, about smashing it against the wall, but the impulse quickly passed. Violence would only prove them right. It was the one thing they all expected from her. Anger without purpose, outbursts that meant nothing. So she kept scrubbing, scraping at the grime that clung to the porcelain, the way their cruelty clung to her. She didn't know how long she was in there. Minutes? Hours? She wasn't counting. The exhaustion of the task, the pressure of holding everything inside, made her feel numb. She finished the job with an eerie calm, stepping back to inspect the, now spotless toilet. It was clean. The smell of bleach still hung in the air, a toxic reminder of what she had to endure. But it was done. Her hands were shaking now, and she wiped them on her pants before grabbing her phone. She needed to talk. She needed to hear a voice that wasn't tainted by judgment, someone who saw her. Carol. She dialed quickly, barely waiting for the call to connect. "You were right," she said, voice shaking. She crossed the line. Carol's voice was steady, unfazed by the desperation in Elaine's tone. "You still have power," Carol said, the words cutting through the tension. "You just haven't used it." The truth hit Elaine like a jolt of electricity. Power. She still had power. She could make a choice. She could stop letting them control her. The question wasn't whether she could fight back. It was when. She set the phone down with a purpose. The weight in her chest had shifted, the dark, heavy cloud that had surrounded her clearing slightly. Power. It wasn't something given. It was something taken. The door to her room creaked open, the dim light from the hallway spilling across the floor. Her heart pounded as her eyes flicked toward the darkened hallway. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. There was still one thing left to do. She could feel it. It was time. Elaine took a step toward the door, her movement slow but deliberate. The house, the rules, the expectations. They felt distant now, like things that no longer had a hold over her. She was done being invisible. The late afternoon sun cast a soft golden light over the kitchen counter where Elaine had laid out a pile of documents. She hadn't looked at them in weeks, but now, as the day's quiet pressure pressed against her, she could almost hear the soft rustle of the papers calling to her. There was something about the way the light caught the edges of the pages, something familiar about the ink that stained the paper that made everything feel urgent. She reached for the stack with a kind of reverence, flipping through the carefully organized files. The co-ownership clause stared back at her. 40% of the house, gifted equity, a silent promise. She wasn't here by accident, no matter how much Marcus had tried to rewrite the story. She belonged here just as much as he did, if not more. Her fingers skimmed the life occupancy clause, the agreement that had been buried under years of silence and subtle manipulation. She had forgotten nothing, not the long hours of negotiation, not the promises made, not the fine print. They had all thought she had, thought she'd been lulled into complacency by their constant disapproving stares and dismissive actions. But they hadn't understood her. Not yet, and when they did, it would be too late. The phone buzzed on the counter, an unexpected disruption that shattered her focus. It was Carol. Deidre Bloom, Carol said without preamble. She's aggressive, thorough. If anyone can help you move this forward, it's her. Elaine sat back, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of the words settle in. She'd heard of Deidre before. Her reputation was notorious. If Deidre was anything, she was relentless. Elaine knew exactly what Carol meant. She needed someone who could cut through the red tape, someone who wouldn't hesitate to turn every stone, dig into every contract, and make sure no detail was left unchecked. Elaine's hand hovered over the phone. Then, with one decisive tap, she dialed the number Carol had given her. Deidre's office was exactly as Elaine had imagined, sleek, sharp corners, and an air of cold professionalism. When Elaine stepped inside, Deidre was already seated at her desk, papers sprawled across the surface, eyes flicking between them as if they were a puzzle to be solved. Deidre looked up when Elaine entered, giving her a sharp, appraising glance before motioning for her to sit. "No time for niceties. Let's get to work," Deidre said, her voice a brisk, no-nonsense tone that fit the room perfectly. Elaine sat, watching as Deidre shuffled the papers around, her sharp fingers tapping against a stack of forms. Elaine laid out the receipts on the desk, bank wire transfers, gift letters, the co-ownership clause, the life occupancy agreement. She slid them across the table with deliberate care. Deidre glanced at the first few sheets, then paused, her gaze sharpening. "You've done your homework," Deidre said, leaning back in her chair. "You're not just some disgruntled tenant, are you?" Elaine shook her head, a wry smile curling at the corners of her lips. "No, I'm not just that." Deidre's lips quirked as she examined the documents, her eyes scanning the fine print, checking the figures, comparing them with the terms. When she finally spoke again, her voice was measured, controlled. "You have standing," she said, her eyes meeting Elaine's with a spark of approval. "You can force a sale, or, if need be, remove them. It's all here." She motioned toward the papers. "You've got the leverage, but it's up to you how you want to play it." Elaine felt a thrill run through her, something primal. Power, at last. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She had been fighting this whole time, unknowingly, and now here it was, the key to her future in her hands. "Let's start quiet," Elaine said, her voice cool and measured. But no mercy, none. Deidre's eyes sparkled, a smirk tugging at her lips. Good, I like that. Quiet doesn't mean weak. The two women exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. Deidre was exactly what Elaine needed. She wasn't interested in half measures. She wasn't interested in being polite. She was interested in results. Back at the house, Elaine moved through the halls like a ghost. Her every step felt deliberate now, as if she was no longer bound by the invisible chains that had once confined her. The air was different, charged with something that tasted like victory, something that whispered, "This is mine." Her mind was still buzzing from her meeting with Deidre, but there was no time for contemplation now. As she passed the kitchen, she heard a knock at the door. She froze. Then, a voice she didn't expect. "Grandma, that was wrong. I saw it." Elaine's heart skipped. Mia stood in the doorway, eyes wide with something that could almost be called guilt. Or was it fear? Elaine's pulse quickened. For a moment, she considered ignoring her, walking away, leaving Mia to stew in her own thoughts. But something stopped her. A quiet voice, the same one that had pushed her through every day, now whispered, "Now is the time." She turned slowly, her gaze locking on Mia's. "Come in," Elaine said, her voice steady but with an edge. Mia hesitated, stepping inside with an awkward shuffle of her feet. She didn't look at Elaine, but Elaine could see it now, the cracks, the guilt, the realization. Elaine tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the younger woman's posture. This was no longer about the house. This was about something deeper, something Mia hadn't quite figured out yet. "You saw it?" Elaine's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "What exactly did you see?" Mia swallowed hard, eyes flickering between the floor and Elaine's piercing gaze. She didn't know what she was walking into, but Elaine did. And she wasn't going to let Mia, or anyone else, stop her now. Not after everything. The envelope lay on the kitchen counter, its edges sharp and clinical, like a blade meant to cut through the last of Elaine's patience. Her name was scrawled across the front in a hurried, almost desperate hand. The handwriting belonged to Jenna. Elaine didn't need to open it to know what it was. She could already feel the weight of the condescending tone, the same one that had made her scrub toilets and do everything else without question. But now, this felt different. This wasn't just an insult. This was a calculation. Elaine slid a finger under the flap, tearing it open. The smell of paper and ink filled the air as she unfolded the contents. A spreadsheet, itemized, rent, food, toilet paper. All of it, priced, as if every basic need were something she should be grateful for. The numbers leapt off the page at her. Monthly rent, $1,200, food, $300 toilet paper, $40 utilities, $150 miscellaneous costs, $100. Elaine's lips tightened, and her fingers tightened around the paper. There it was, the audacity, the presumption, the complete disregard for the truth of her situation. What the hell is this, she thought, the heat of indignation swelling inside her chest. The message was clear. She wasn't just an unwilling guest. She was a financial burden. She should have been angry. She should have screamed, or at least called Jenna out. But instead, a strange calm washed over her. Jenna, Marcus, they had underestimated her in ways they couldn't begin to understand. If they thought this invoice was going to break her, they were gravely mistaken. Elaine folded the paper neatly and picked up her pen. With slow, deliberate strokes, she began her reply. She wasn't going to rise to their petty games. Instead, she would offer a response that was as cold and calculated as their little power play. Marcus was in the study, sitting behind his desk, his face buried in his laptop, when the letter appeared in front of him, silently placed there by Elaine. His eyebrows furrowed as he glanced at the neatly typed words. "Dear Jenna, thank you for your itemized list. I will consider this a formal statement of what I owe. In return, please send a full accounting of my home equity buy-in and any offsets related to mortgage interest, taxes, and the real costs I've covered over the years. Best, Elaine. Elaine took a breath, steadying herself. There was no need for theatrics. This wasn't about drama. This was about facts, about setting the record straight. She had the leverage now. She had every right to demand what was hers. Marcus looked up from the letter, his face flushed with a mixture of disbelief and anger. He didn't even need to look at Elaine to know what she was doing. His lips curled into a tight frown as he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice clipped, like the words were forced out of him, a demand, not a question. Elaine met his gaze with the calm of someone who had already won. Escalating this, she said simply, her eyes never leaving his. "You let her value me. Now I'm replying in kind." Marcus stared at her for a long beat, his expression hardening. He opened his mouth to say something, but his words caught in his throat. He didn't know how to handle this version of Elaine, the one who had finally found her voice, the one who wasn't afraid anymore. "You're going too far," Marcus muttered, but it lacked conviction. He knew he was losing ground, and it unsettled him. Elaine's smile was almost imperceptible, but it carried the weight of a quiet triumph. She didn't need to argue or defend herself. She didn't need to explain. She had already taken the first step toward reclaiming control, and he could either keep up or get left behind. As she turned to leave, she felt something shift in the air, something that had been missing for too long. Power, her own power, and it wasn't going anywhere. The next evening, as the house settled into its usual eerie quiet, Elaine walked past the kitchen again, only to stop short. On the counter, nestled among the clutter, was a folded piece of paper. She wasn't expecting it, yet there it was, as if waiting for her. Her pulse quickened as she unfolded it. The paper was thin, the kind that could be torn easily. It was a sketch, a crude hand-drawn rendering of a house, split directly down the middle. One side was shaded, darkened. The other side was light, filled with an almost painful brightness. Elaine's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the hand that had drawn it. "Mia." She turned the sketch over, finding a short note scribbled across the back. "I don't want to be a part of this, but I see you now." The words hit her harder than she expected. Mia, her granddaughter, who had always been so distant, had somehow crossed that invisible line. She was aware now, aware of everything. Elaine folded the paper slowly, a sense of foreboding creeping in. She wasn't sure what Mia's gesture meant, but one thing was clear. Nothing was going to be the same anymore. The walls that had once been so solid, so impenetrable, were crumbling. And somewhere deep inside, Elaine knew that the game had only just begun. The letter arrived 2 days after Deidre's assurance. Elaine hadn't expected any less than the formal, mechanical tone that came with it, but it still carried the weight of an irrevocable decision. The letter was clear. 60 days to comply. She read it 3 times to make sure it wasn't some error, some misplaced phrase. But no, it was real. The legal process had begun. Marcus and Jenna had no choice now but to either buy her out or sell the house. Elaine set the letter down slowly, letting the significance of the words sink in. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She wasn't a problem to be dealt with in passing. She was entitled, legally, to her stake. The house was no longer their sanctuary. It was just another piece of property with obligations and terms, and they would be forced to face the reality they had long avoided. The next morning, the explosion was as inevitable as the dawn. Elaine heard it from the hallway, Jenna's shrill, panicked voice, cutting through the quiet. "You can't just do this. You can't take everything." Marcus's voice followed, lower, pleading. "Elaine, please, think about this. This is our home, for God's sake." Elaine stood in the doorway, her stance unwavering, her arms folded, an invisible shield of calm around her. "You've had months to think about it. Now it's time for action." Jenna's eyes went wild as she turned to face her, her face flushed with anger and frustration. You You think you can just waltz in here and claim a share? This is our home. You don't deserve it. Elaine didn't flinch. The law disagrees, she said simply, letting the words hang between them like a challenge. Marcus stepped forward, his face crumpled with desperation. Please, Elaine. You don't have to do this. Just let it go. This isn't you. You're better than this. Elaine's gaze held steady, unbroken. I'm better than this because I'm finally standing up for myself. And you can either accept that or you can leave. The words were final, unwavering. There was a long pause, the silence suffocating, before Jenna's voice cracked again. You'll regret this. Elaine didn't respond. She didn't need to. By the time Deidre's paperwork had been processed, Elaine had already taken another step toward securing her future. She didn't want to linger in the tense void of the house. So, she'd started the search for a senior condo nearby. Somewhere small, somewhere quiet. The idea of a fresh start, of a life without the constant pressure and degradation, felt like a breath of air after years of holding her breath underwater. She wasn't just taking back what was hers, she was moving forward, and she was doing it without looking back. Carol called later that day, her voice steady but laden with approval. They thought you were trapped. Now, they're cornered. Elaine could hear the satisfaction in Carol's words. The tables had turned completely, and there was no escape for Marcus and Jenna now. They had underestimated her, underestimated the strength she carried. Elaine felt the rush of it, the weight of the victory still sinking in. But there was no time for triumph now. This was just the beginning. The next phase was the hardest, the most final. But it was already in motion, and she couldn't stop it. Later that evening, Elaine checked her phone to find a message from Mia. The text was simple, just a sentence. They're posting about you online. Elaine raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. She opened the app, finding Jenna's post almost immediately. It was a picture of the house, the same place where Elaine had spent so many silent hours. But now, Jenna's words hovered over the image like an accusation. Some people don't appreciate hospitality. Elaine's lips curled into a slight smile. It wasn't anger she felt, just amusement. Jenna, in her desperation, was trying to paint a picture of herself as the wronged party, of Elaine as some ungrateful intruder. But the truth was too clear now. Elaine wasn't the problem, she was the solution. Her fingers hovered over the screen, but instead of responding, she simply set the phone down. Let them speak. Let them tell their side of the story. The truth would come out in the end. And Elaine didn't need to defend herself anymore. Her eyes flicked to the legal papers once more, and the corners of her mouth tugged upward. The house they thought was theirs would never be theirs again. They had built it on lies and manipulation, and now it would be dismantled by the truth. Elaine stood, her gaze steady, unwavering, as she walked toward the kitchen, her future already unfolding in her mind. She wasn't just taking back what was hers, she was creating something new. And this time, it was hers to keep. Elaine stood in front of the house, her hands shaking slightly as she picked up the sign, feeling the weight of it in her palms. The freshly printed letters gleamed in the morning sun. For sale. Court ordered. The words felt heavy, like a final breath escaping from the lungs of the house that had been her prison for so long. She nailed the sign into the front yard, watching the metal stake pierce the earth. Securing it firmly in place, she stepped back, feeling a rush of something, relief, triumph, maybe even a small flicker of vengeance. Whatever it was, it burned bright. The house was no longer just a home to them. It was a reminder of everything that had been taken from her. It had become a monument to their arrogance, their disregard for her stake, her rights. But now it was a symbol of her reclaiming everything they tried to bury. Jenna's car screeched into the driveway an hour later, the tires skidding as if to protest the reality unfolding before her. She stepped out, her eyes darting to the sign as her face drained of color. The anger that bubbled under the surface was too much for her to contain. "Take that down," she screamed. her voice cracking in disbelief. Elaine didn't flinch. She didn't need to. "It's staying," she replied, her tone steady, but there was a cold finality to it that left no room for argument. Jenna's face flushed, her fingers twitching at her sides. But Elaine stood there, unwavering. Let her shout. Let her rage. It was too late now. Moments later, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face lined with a mix of desperation and fury. "Elaine, please, you don't have to do this. You don't want to do this." Elaine turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "I've already made my choice." He stepped forward, his voice pleading, but his words were hollow. "You can't just make them think we're being forced out. Think about the neighbors. Think about the family." Elaine gave him a small, almost pitying smile. "I'm not forcing anyone out. You did that when you thought I didn't matter." Her words sliced through the tension like a blade, but there was no triumph in her expression, only a cold, hard truth. Jenna stormed up behind him, her face red with anger, but it wasn't enough to hide the vulnerability in her eyes. "You're going to regret this," she spat, but it was clear the threat lacked conviction. She knew as well as Elaine did that the battle was lost before it had even begun. The sound of a car door slamming outside cut through the confrontation. The real estate agent had arrived. There was no turning back now. He stepped out of his car, walking up the driveway with a clipboard in hand, glancing at the sign. Before giving Elaine a nod, Jenna took a step toward the agent, trying to stall, her hands trembling as she attempted a false smile. "Is it really necessary to take pictures today?" she asked. Her voice strained, almost too sweet. "Can't we?" The agent cut her off with a quick shake of his head. "The court's orders are clear. We have to document everything for the sale. The deadline's tight." He glanced again at Elaine, whose gaze remained fixed on the house. It was as if she was looking at the last remnants of the life that had been forced upon her. Marcus turned to Elaine one last time, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Please don't do this." Elaine's response was simple. "You had your chance." As the agent began his work, snapping photos, Jenna watched, her lips trembling, helplessness creeping in with every shot. Marcus hung back, silent, his posture hunched, like he was already defeated. Later that afternoon, Elaine stood in her room, packing a single suitcase. There was no need for more. The rest of the things she had accumulated in this house, memories, possessions, meant nothing anymore. She had outgrown them. The last thing she needed was a house full of reminders of the people who had never seen her for what she was. She zipped the suitcase shut, the sound final. As she walked through the house, she paused at the kitchen table. It was the same spot where she had been handed the gloves that had marked the moment she knew her fight had begun. A single note lay there now, written in neat, bold handwriting. "You shouldn't have handed me gloves." Elaine set the pen down with a soft, almost amused sigh. Jenna would understand it in time, or not. Either way, Elaine had said everything she needed to say. She picked up her suitcase and headed toward the door. It was time to go. This place wasn't hers anymore. As she walked out into the crisp air, she didn't look back. The house stood there, looming behind her, but it was already fading from her mind. The life she was walking into, one where she made the rules, where she wasn't a shadow or an afterthought, was waiting for her, and it had nothing to do with that house. Everything had changed, and this time there would be no going back. The offer came quickly, cleanly. Deidre's legal team had drawn up the disbursement documents with efficiency that left no room for argument. Elaine skimmed the papers, each line a formal acknowledgement of what had long been hers: equity, rights, and the ability to claim what others had tried to deny. There was nothing personal in this. There didn't need to be. She signed the documents with a sense of finality, her pen scratching across the lines with a deliberate, almost mechanical motion. The weight of it settled into her chest, but it didn't hurt. If anything, it gave her a quiet satisfaction. This was her due. The value of what she had built, even in the quietest corners of the house, was finally recognized. The next few days were a blur of logistical negotiations and tense conversations. Jenna and Marcus were forced into a corner. They could either buy her out within 14 days or vacate the property. The ultimatum was clear, and the consequences were unavoidable. Elaine didn't have to watch them flounder, but she did anyway. She watched as Marcus made countless calls, his voice laced with desperation. His efforts to secure a loan were futile. Each bank turned him down, citing his lack of collateral and unstable financial standing. He was trapped, bound by his own choices, unable to break free from the web he had tangled himself in. Jenna, meanwhile, lashed out in a series of futile attempts. She tried in vain to file a harassment complaint against Elaine, claiming she was being driven out of her own home. The authorities were quick to dismiss it. The legal papers, the for sale sign. Everything was above board, and Jenna's claims were nothing more than the desperate flailing of someone who could no longer control the narrative. The dismissive letter from the court was like a final nail in the coffin, a sharp reminder that the world had shifted, and they were no longer the ones holding the power. Elaine sat back in her new condo, looking out at the city skyline, the weight of the world lifting off her shoulders with every passing day. It was a 2-bedroom place, modest but hers. She had paid for it in full, no loans, no obligations, just the satisfaction of a clean slate. The walls were still bare, but she didn't mind. It was all hers. She could decorate it, fill it with the things she loved, or leave it empty, a reflection of how far she'd come. As she sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, a soft smile tugging at her lips as she saw Mia's name. The text was simple, but loaded with meaning. "Can I visit sometime?" Elaine set the phone down, her mind racing. There was so much she still had to process, so much to untangle, but the thought of Mia, someone who had seen the truth in the end, suddenly felt like a thread pulling her forward. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something to rebuild. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before she typed a simple response. Any time. As she hit send, a sense of peace washed over her. The life she had fought for was beginning to take shape, and this time it was on her terms. The knock at Carol's door was sharp, aggressive, too fast for the usual visitor. Carol was in the kitchen when she heard it, a staccato rhythm that hinted at urgency. She stood drying her hands on a dish towel, before glancing over her shoulder at Elaine, who sat on the couch, calmly sipping her tea. The silence between them felt peaceful, but it was a quiet before a storm. Carol moved toward the door, her expression unreadable. As she opened it, the sharpness of Jenna's voice immediately cut through the air. "She's destroying her family!" Jenna shrieked, her face flushed with fury, eyes wild. She didn't give Carol a chance to speak, pressing forward into the doorway with a tight grip on her purse, her knuckles white. "You have no idea what she's done, how this will ruin everything." Carol didn't flinch, her posture relaxed but firm as she stepped into the threshold. "You need to leave." Jenna's eyes burned with an intensity that was almost frightening. "You let her take everything. She's tearing this family apart. Marcus can't even get a loan. Do you understand that? You're on my porch," Carol interrupted, her voice still low but tinged with authority, "and you're not welcome here." Elaine's fingers tightened around the mug of tea as she watched the confrontation unfold from her place on the couch. She wasn't surprised. She'd known Jenna would come, had known the moment she'd stepped into her new life that there would be a backlash. The anger, the accusations, they were all a part of the playbook. But she wasn't going to engage. Not now, not ever again. The price of silence was far greater than the sting of words. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the muffled yelling from the front yard. Jenna's voice rose higher, becoming more desperate with each word. "She's ruining us, Carol. Everything we've worked for. This was supposed to be our home." "I'm not interested in your drama," Carol said plainly, her voice unwavering. "Get off my porch." Outside, Jenna's screams echoed down the street, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, but Carol simply stood there, unmoved. Elaine felt the tightness in her chest ease as she sipped her tea, the noise from the front fading into the background. As though it no longer had power over her, Carol was handling it. No one here was interested in Jenna's tears or Marcus's excuses anymore. Elaine picked up her phone and dialed Deidre's number. The screen still warm from the text she'd sent Mia earlier. It felt good to be moving on, but even now, the world they had tried to trap her in wasn't quite finished with her. Not yet. Add slander documentation to the file, Elaine said once Deidre picked up. Her voice steady, quiet, almost clinical. Jenna's escalating. I'll need it when the time comes. Understood, Deidre replied, her tone brisk but professional. I'll handle it. Elaine hung up, the weight of the conversation settling in her chest. She could feel the walls shifting around her, but this time, they were closing in on the ones who had tried to make her smaller. She'd forced her way into this world, made it hers, and now she wouldn't back down. Not now. A soft vibration in her hand made her glance at her phone again. A text from Marcus. She opened it, expecting the usual passive-aggressive commentary. But instead, the words were almost apologetic, half-hearted. Elaine, I know this has gone too far. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say, but I didn't want it to end like this. You deserve more than this. Elaine stared at the message for a long moment, her thoughts a mixture of everything they had put her through. She felt nothing, not anger, not even satisfaction, just nothing. She put the phone down on the table, turned back toward the window, and let the quiet of the condo wash over her once again. The world outside wasn't waiting for her to make a choice anymore. It was already unfolding, and the best part was, she was finally in control of the direction. But as the last remnants of the argument outside trickled away into the distance, something gnawed at her, a quiet, almost forgotten ache. Jenna's screams, the guilt in Marcus's text, they hadn't changed anything, but they still held weight. And in the silence of the room, Elaine knew this. The game had only just begun. The day the house sale finalized, Elaine stood at her new kitchen counter, a check for $168,000 sitting in front of her. She didn't need to check the number again. It was real, it was hers. The weight of the check felt light in her hands, but the implications of it were far from subtle. Her life had shifted irreversibly, and now the final confirmation was tangible. Proof that everything she had fought for had finally come to fruition. She wasn't just moving forward, she had arrived. The check was a symbol of both her victory and the road ahead, but she wasn't finished. Not yet. As she set the check aside, her mind drifted to the next step. Deidre had already prepared the cease and desist letter, detailing the harassment Jenna had unleashed on her. Elaine read through it, each word like a hammer driving into the foundation of the life they had tried to trap her in. Jenna must stop all forms of contact immediately. She'd crossed lines, threats, slander, the ugliness of it all. Elaine felt the familiar calm settle over her once more. She had no intention of letting them tear at the fabric of her hard-earned peace. The letter would be sent today, ensuring that they knew there were consequences to their actions. Later that afternoon, Elaine was standing outside her new condo, staring at the door. With a steady hand, she installed a video doorbell, the modern, sleek device giving her a sense of security she had never felt in that house. It wasn't just about protection from potential threats. It was about control, knowing that she had the power to monitor the world that had once encroached on her, knowing she wasn't vulnerable to the whims of the people who had manipulated her for so long. Once the doorbell was set, she stood back, admiring the simple technology. The house she had once been invisible in was now a fortress of her own making. She smiled to herself, a quiet satisfaction filling the empty space. Jenna and Marcus, meanwhile, were now living in a rental. It was a smaller place. No extra bathroom, no grand dining room or airy living spaces. Just enough for them to scrape by. Elaine had no sympathy for them. They had been given every opportunity to do the right thing, to treat her with dignity and respect, but instead they had tried to break her. Now they were the ones left behind, scrambling in a life that barely resembled the comfort they'd once known. Carol had been to see it, and when she called Elaine later that day, the humor was impossible to hide in her voice. "She's finally cleaning her own toilets now," Carol remarked, a light chuckle slipping through. There was something darkly satisfying in that image. Jenna had always thought she was above the work, above the struggle, but now there was no escape from it, no easy way out. Elaine's lips curved, a smile touching her face. Good, she deserves it. As the days passed, Elaine started to fill the empty spaces in her life with things that brought her peace. She joined a local seniors club, a small but welcoming community. They had weekly gardening days, where she learned how to nurture plants she never had time for before, and board game nights that felt like a quiet rebellion against the years of isolation she had endured. One afternoon, as she bent down to plant a small rose bush in her tiny garden, the sun warm on her face, she realized something. For the first time in a long while, the world outside her windows wasn't a prison. It was a place she could shape, a space she could live in on her own terms. The peace she'd fought for had finally settled inside her, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. But even in this new chapter, the shadow of the past lingered. As she placed the rose in the soil, she thought of Marcus's last half-hearted apology, of Jenna's angry face at Carol's doorstep. Their voices had faded into the background, but the fear they had once instilled in her was still a distant echo, one she couldn't entirely shake. There was a sudden ping from her phone. Elaine wiped her hands on her gardening gloves before glancing at the screen. A message from Mia. "Can I visit sometime?" Elaine paused, her breath catching in her throat. Her fingers hovered over the phone for a moment. The past was never truly gone. It had simply receded, like a wave pulling back before it surged again. The invitation was simple, but the weight of it made her wonder, was Mia seeking connection, or just another reminder of everything she had left behind? Elaine set the phone down, her gaze moving back to the rose bush, the soft hum of the neighborhood around her. She had fought for this life, and no matter what came next, she was ready to face it. But there was a gnawing question in the back of her mind. Would the past ever fully release her? The voicemail came in the middle of the afternoon, a single notification flashing across her screen. Elaine sat still for a moment, staring at the number on the display, her pulse quickening as she recognized the area code. It was Marcus's. Her hand hovered over the phone, hesitating for just a beat before she pressed play. The words that followed were not what she expected. They were quiet, strained, full of a shame she could almost taste. "Elaine, I don't know how to fix this, but I'm sorry. I should have listened. I shouldn't have let Jenna control everything. I've made a mess of everything, and now it's too late. I don't even know where to start to make things right." Marcus's voice cracked toward the end, the sorrow in it palpable, almost as if he were confessing something heavier than guilt. Elaine's chest tightened as she listened, the weight of the admission hitting her like a wave, but she didn't respond immediately. She could feel the bitterness, the sting of all the years they'd wasted treating her like an afterthought. As the voicemail ended, she hit save without a second thought. When Deidre called an hour later, Elaine was sitting at her kitchen table, the voicemail still lingering in her mind. She played it again for Deidre, who listened quietly on the other end of the line. When the recording ended, Deidre spoke in the sharp, no-nonsense tone Elaine had come to rely on. "Too little, too late," Deidre said. "We'll add it to the record. It's clear now they know how much they've screwed up." Elaine nodded, her gaze distant as she gazed out of the window. She had known for a while that Marcus wouldn't come through, that his apology wouldn't be enough. But hearing him say it, hearing the defeat in his voice, it still felt hollow. There was nothing left for him to offer her, not any more. She hung up the phone with a quiet resolution. The past was a broken record, repeating the same cycle of betrayal and apologies. But that chapter was over now. The email came the next day. "You ruined our lives," it read, the message brimming with resentment, desperation seeping through every word. "You've taken everything from us, and now we have nothing. You should have never come into our lives, never claimed what wasn't yours." Elaine read it once, twice, her fingers frozen on the keys of her laptop. Then, with a breath that felt like the release of years of held breath, she typed her response. "You said I wasn't part of it." She paused, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment before pressing send. There was nothing more to say. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no place for them to hide anymore. The doorbell rang as she set the laptop aside, the familiar chime pulling her back into the present. Mia stood there on the doorstep when Elaine opened the door. A mop dangled from her hand, her expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. Elaine looked at the mop for a long moment before her lips curved into a soft smile. "You brought a mop?" Elaine asked, her voice full of gentle surprise. Mia nodded, her eyes glinting with a quiet intensity. "Grandma, let's clean the windows," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. There was something almost too grown-up in her voice, something that belied the softness of her age. Elaine couldn't help but feel a pang of pride, mixed with something else she hadn't expected. Warmth? As they moved through the condo, scrubbing the windows together, the sounds of their work filled the space, a hum of shared purpose. Elaine caught herself glancing at Mia from time to time. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this kind of connection with her granddaughter. The simple act of cleaning windows was a metaphor for the clarity that had been slowly settling over her life. Outside, the neighborhood had quieted, but inside, it was just the two of them. As the last streak was wiped away, Elaine stepped back, her hands resting on her hips. Mia looked up at her with a smile. "There, clean." Elaine's heart clenched. It wasn't just the windows. The clarity had already begun. The past was fading, one small movement at a time. But there was a whisper, soft but insistent, in the back of her mind. The fear they earned is still out there. She didn't have to look back. She didn't have to ask herself if they would ever stop. If Jenna's venomous words, Marcus's apology, or the mistakes of the past would ever truly fade. But as she stood there, beside Mia in this new life, she realized she didn't need to know. The future was here, waiting to be shaped. And she was no longer afraid of what might come next. The old will had been sitting in a drawer for years, untouched, unspoken for, a relic of a life that no longer felt relevant. Now, as Elaine sat at the kitchen table with a fresh legal pad before her, she could feel the weight of the decision she was about to make settle in her bones. Her life had changed irrevocably, and it was time her final documents reflected that. Carol was the first name she wrote down, not because Carol had asked, but because Elaine knew no one else could be trusted with her health, her decisions, the last moments of her life. Carol was the one who had stood by her, who had been there when everyone else had turned away. When the time came, it was Carol's name she wanted beside hers. Elaine tapped the pen against the pad, thinking for a moment. Mia had to be included. She had been the spark, the unexpected connection. And even though she was still young, there was a piece of her that Elaine wanted to preserve. A trust for Mia, to be held until she was 25, when she was ready, when she'd seen enough of the world to understand. She wrote her name down with a firm hand, no hesitation. Mia, beneficiary of the trust, to be held in full at age 25. And then the final clause came, one that felt both personal and righteous, a reflection of everything that had been stolen from her, the memories, the dignity, the years of service without respect. Those who clean with cruelty will receive nothing but dust. Elaine's hand hovered over the page for a long moment as she considered it. But the truth of the matter was, Jenna and Marcus would never get a penny of what she had earned. They had made their choice long ago, and now it was time for them to reap what they had sown. She put the pen down, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. The legal process, the paperwork, the decisions, they were just as much a part of her new life as the flowers she planted outside her condo. This was her world now. She had control. And the people who had tried to break her, they would get nothing. The next morning, Elaine met Naomi, the notary, at her favorite cafe. Naomi was efficient, all business, but there was a kindness in her eyes that Elaine trusted. She slid the pages across the table, watching as Naomi read them quickly, her eyes flicking over the words with precision. "Everything seems in order," Naomi said after a brief pause. "You've thought this through." Elaine nodded, her fingers wrapped around the cup of coffee in front of her. "I have," she replied simply. Naomi signed the documents and stamped them, a finality that felt like a weight lifting. "It's done," she said, handing Elaine a copy. "I'll file the original with the county. It's official." Elaine took the papers, the weight of them not heavy, but significant. The finality of the decision had settled deep inside her, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace. A week later, a card arrived in the mail. Elaine opened it slowly, her fingers trembling for no reason she could place. Inside, Mia had written a short note, scribbled with the sharp, careful handwriting of someone still growing, but already wise beyond her years. "Thank you for everything, Grandma. You're my blueprint. I'm proud to be your granddaughter." Elaine set the card down, blinking back the sudden, unexpected tears that threatened to spill over. My blueprint. It was the first time anyone had said anything like that to her, and the impact of it hit her harder than she expected. Mia had seen her, not as an obstacle or someone to be used, but as something to look up to aspire to. Elaine's heart clenched, the weight of those words wrapping around her chest like a soft embrace. The next day, Deidre called. Elaine had been expecting it. There was always another step, another decision to be made. This time, Deidre's voice was slightly different, more urgent. "You could sue for elder emotional abuse," Deidre said, her tone clipped but clear. "You have the case. They didn't just take your house. They took your dignity, your well-being. You have the right to fight back, Elaine. If you want to, we can go after them. We can win." Elaine sat back in her chair, her fingers grazing the edges of the legal documents she'd just filed. The idea of suing them, of dragging the past back into the light, was tempting, but she knew the cost. The time, the emotional toll. She had already won. She had taken her life back, piece by piece, and she didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. "I've already won," Elaine said softly, her voice steady, but with a quiet strength. "I don't need to sue them, Deidre. I'm done with them." Deidre was silent for a moment before she spoke again. "I understand. You've built a life for yourself, Elaine. That's the real victory." Elaine smiled, her eyes closing briefly as the weight of those words settled in. It was true. No matter what came next, no matter what they tried to do, she had won. And they would never be able to take that away from her. As she hung up the phone, Elaine glanced at the thank you card once more. The blueprint. She could almost hear Mia's voice in her mind. Proud and certain, Elaine had been the one to shape herself, to fight for the life she wanted. And now, at last, she was free. But as the future unfolded before her, one thought lingered in the back of her mind. What would the past do when it realized it could no longer control her? Elaine couldn't be sure, but she wasn't afraid to find out. Elaine's decision to join the local advocacy group for seniors wasn't born from a sudden desire to be a part of something, but rather out of necessity. She had come to a place in her life where silence no longer felt safe. It felt suffocating. For years, she had been swallowed by others' expectations, their control over her decisions. Now, she was reclaiming her voice. The group met weekly in a small community center, a humble space filled with mismatched chairs and old tables, but the energy inside was anything but tired. There were conversations about healthcare, resources, rights, things Elaine hadn't given much thought to until now. As the weeks passed, she found herself speaking more, listening to the stories of others who had faced challenges of their own. And slowly, the quiet strength she had carried for so long began to grow. One evening, the group held a community event, a fundraiser, a call to arms for local senior support. They invited members to speak, to share their stories of resilience, and Elaine was asked to do the same. She hesitated at first, unsure how much she was ready to share, but after a long breath, she agreed. It wasn't about her, it was about all of them. The ones who had survived in the shadows, the ones who had fought battles no one had seen. When her turn came, she stood before the crowd, her hands steady at her sides. She didn't have a script. She didn't need one. She spoke from the heart, telling her story of the house, the betrayal, the fight for her own life. She renamed the characters carefully, distancing herself from the personal sting of their real names. Marcus and Jenna became nameless figures in the background of her tale, ghosts who no longer had any hold on her. Her words weren't for them anymore. As she finished, there was a quiet pause before the applause began. Carol's clapping was the loudest, and Elaine found herself smiling through the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. Carol's pride was tangible, her eyes shining in a way that made Elaine's heart swell. She wasn't alone. The event was recorded and shared on Facebook later that evening, a small victory in a world still too big to conquer. But what Elaine didn't expect was how quickly the video would spread. It went semi-viral, a ripple in a quiet pond that quickly became a wave. She hadn't planned for this. She didn't want the spotlight, didn't need it. But the comments began to flood in. Messages of support, stories of others who had faced their own struggles, words of encouragement that she had never thought she would receive. One comment stood out, though, as it popped up on her phone the following morning. "You humiliated us." Elaine froze for a moment, her heart skipping in her chest as she read the words again. The familiar sting of Jenna's bitterness was unmistakable. The message was followed by a bitter tirade about how Elaine's story had shamed them, how she had made them the villains in her tale. Elaine set her phone down slowly, a calmness washing over her that she hadn't expected. Humiliated them? No, she hadn't humiliated anyone. She had simply spoken the truth. But Jenna. She was humiliated by the reality she could no longer escape. Without hesitation, Elaine opened the message, then blocked Jenna. The screen blinked once, then the name disappeared. It was done. No more words, no more guilt, no more attempts to manipulate her. The silence that followed felt different this time. Not oppressive, not stifling. Just free. She had nothing left to prove. Later that afternoon, Carol stopped by to visit, her eyes twinkling with amusement as she approached the door. Elaine greeted her with a smile, but Carol didn't need an invitation to speak. "Did you see the comments?" Carol asked, practically vibrating with excitement. "I knew it would hit. You're a force, Elaine. People needed to hear your story." Elaine leaned against the doorframe, smiling softly. "I didn't expect all this attention, but it's good. They need to know they're not alone." "And I'm not either." Carol nodded, her smile never fading. "Exactly. They didn't see you coming. But now, they can't ignore you." Elaine let the words settle between them, absorbing the quiet validation that Carol offered without hesitation. She had already won. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a voice for others, a beacon for those who had suffered in silence, and she wouldn't stop now. As the evening stretched on, Elaine sat back in her living room, the soft hum of her condo around her, the neighborhood sounds fading into the background. She thought about what lay ahead, the things she still wanted to do, the causes she now cared about. But the truth was, she wasn't afraid anymore. She had faced her past, fought for her future, and now the world had no choice but to hear her. And just as she leaned back into her chair, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Mia. It read, "Grandma, I'm so proud of you. I want to be like you when I grow up." Elaine smiled, her chest tightening with the kind of pride only a grandmother could understand. The future was here, and it was brighter than she could have ever imagined. It didn't take long for the legal system to put Jenna in her place. Her claim of harassment, her last attempt to grab at something, anything, was dismissed within hours of being filed. Deidre, as always, was swift in her response. The paperwork she submitted was meticulous, detailing the years of emotional and verbal abuse Elaine had endured, and how Jenna's actions had crossed a line into cruelty. It wasn't just a defense, it was a demonstration of the very pattern that had defined Elaine's life with them. When Elaine received the legal clearance letter, it came with a straightforward message. No standing. The matter was closed. Jenna's case was over before it had even begun. Elaine ran her fingers over the paper, the words sinking in. For years, they had tried to control her, to bend her into something that suited their needs. But now? The power was gone. They had no leverage left. The world had shifted, and it no longer revolved around them. Elaine had become untouchable, not through anything grand, but through the quiet force of her resolve. Later that day, the final payment from the sale of the house arrived. The check was smaller than the $168,000 she had once held, but the difference was irrelevant. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was a final acknowledgement of everything that had transpired. The check was the last official connection to the house, her past. And as she opened the envelope, she almost didn't need to look at it to understand what it represented. She had taken her life back. She placed the check on the table, her thoughts momentarily drifting back to the empty house. The rooms that had once felt like prisons were now gone, nothing but memories of people who had tried to erase her worth. But she had left those behind. Elaine spent the next hour on her balcony, planting flowers. She loved the simplicity of it, the dirt beneath her nails, the fresh blooms lining the edge of her space, a vivid splash of color against the urban landscape. The flowers were hers, the balcony was hers. The view was hers. She had spent years in a home she never truly owned. But here, in this small, quiet corner of the world, she was the one shaping it. As she worked, the feeling of peace wrapped around her. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the city. She had made this. She had created this. There was no need for anything more, no desire for anyone's approval. She had everything she needed. The doorbell rang as she was finishing the last row of plants. Her heart gave a small jolt. Mia. She had been expecting her. Mia stood at the door, a quiet look in her eyes. "Grandma," she said softly, "Mom says she wants peace." Elaine stood still for a moment. Looking at her granddaughter, Mia's words were measured, careful. She had always been perceptive, but something about her tone made Elaine's chest tighten. Elaine stepped aside, motioning for Mia to come in. "Peace doesn't include her bathrooms," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of something darker behind it. Mia's eyes widened, and she glanced down, unsure how to respond. Elaine smiled softly, pulling her into a hug. "But I appreciate you coming to talk to me. You're the only one I'll listen to right now." Mia smiled, and for a moment, Elaine felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. She had rebuilt something worth protecting. A future with the people who truly mattered. As they sat down on the balcony, Elaine turned her attention back to the flowers. The small space she had created around her was more than just a physical place. It was a sanctuary from the past, a reminder of what she had fought for. It was a quiet victory, but it was hers. Later that evening, as the city lights flickered on in the distance, Elaine stood at the railing, looking out over the skyline. The world was larger than the space she occupied, but the sense of control she had found here made her feel grounded. She had moved forward, but there was still a lingering question. Would Jenna and Marcus ever understand? Would they ever see the weight of their actions? Elaine didn't know, and for the first time in her life, it didn't matter. She wasn't waiting for them to get it. She had already lived the life they had tried to take from her. The only thing left was the future. And that, Elaine realized with a deep breath, was completely hers to shape. The weight of the decision settled into Elaine's bones as she sat at her kitchen table, the letter of intent in front of her. It was a simple document, but it carried the power to change everything. The intention was clear. She was finalizing the last legal step. It wasn't a matter of revenge. It was a matter of ownership. She was claiming her life fully now, and there was no room for their ghosts in it anymore. The house had been sold. Their manipulations had been cut off, but this was the final seal. She had no illusions about what Jenna and Marcus would try. They would resist. They would fight. They would throw up whatever they could to claw their way back into her life, back into the life they'd always thought was theirs to control. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Elaine slid the letter across the table, the familiar legal jargon that had become part of her new world. She had already signed everything that was necessary, but she wasn't done yet. Beneath the letter, she added something else, the psychological affidavit, confirming that she was of sound mind. She'd been through more than enough therapy to ensure that was beyond any doubt. And yet, she knew the people she was up against. They would call her crazy, would twist her decisions, her actions. She wasn't going to let them. She pressed the letter into the envelope, sealing it with a finality that left her breathless. It was done. The future had been set in motion, and nothing they did would stop it. The next morning, Deidre called as expected, and Elaine could practically hear the smile in her voice. "Filed it already," Deidre said. "I've countered every claim they could make, preemptively. They don't have a leg to stand on." Elaine leaned back in her chair, letting the words sink in. It was official now. There was nothing left they could do to undo this. Deidre continued, her voice low but with a kind of professional glee. "They'll try something else, but I've made sure it won't stick. You're untouchable." Elaine didn't need to ask her what untouchable meant anymore. It meant they were nothing. Nothing at all, and she was free. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Elaine walked into her kitchen, the heart of her small, peaceful home. She glanced at the table, where the letter still lay in front of her, untouched since earlier. But now there was something else, a framed quote she had placed there earlier that day. She hadn't planned it. It had just happened. She had found it at a local store, a simple statement, bold and true. "I am not your maid. I am your consequence." Elaine couldn't help but smile as she stood there, her fingers tracing the edge of the frame. The words had been on her mind for weeks, even months. She had lived them, and now they were a permanent fixture of her life. A reminder, not of what she had been through, but of what she had become. Carol arrived later, a bottle of wine in her hand, her expression a perfect mix of joy and satisfaction. She walked into the kitchen, and without a word, Elaine poured 2 glasses. They clinked their glasses together, the sound crisp, final, a soft declaration of victory. "To you," Carol said, her voice steady and warm. "From gloves to glory." Elaine let out a soft laugh, her eyes meeting Carol's. "From gloves to glory," she echoed, savoring the words. The journey had been long and hard, but it had led her here. It had led her to this moment of peace, of ownership, not just of her life, but of herself. The power they had taken from her, she had reclaimed tenfold. The 2 women sat down at the table, their glasses resting between them. Elaine's gaze lingered on the framed quote for a moment before she turned back to Carol. "I updated my estate one last time," Elaine said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Everything's set. The future is mine, and Mia's, and Carol's." Carol smiled, nodding. "You've done it, Elaine. You've really done it." Elaine's eyes softened as she took a sip of wine. "I think I've always been capable of it. I just had to believe it." As the night wore on, the city lights twinkling outside her window, Elaine felt something she hadn't known in years, hope. The future stretched out before her, untouched and full of promise. She had rebuilt her world from the ground up. And now it was time to live in it, on her own terms. The past, its shadows, its voices, they had no place in this world. Jenna and Marcus had been the architects of their own ruin, and there was no turning back for them. Elaine had built something they could never touch, and as the night deepened, a quiet thought echoed through her mind. This is the life I've earned. For the first time in her life, Elaine truly felt like she was finally living. Elaine's phone buzzed as she sat on her balcony, sipping tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon. She had found a rhythm in her life, a peace she'd never known. The condo was hers, the city stretching out before her, full of opportunities and promise. But when she glanced at her phone, she saw a notification that made her pause, a new email. It was from a popular retirement rights blog, and the headline caught her eye. A Survivor's Journey, Finding Your Voice After Years of Silence. Curious, she opened it. The piece detailed Elaine's story, her fight against Jenna and Marcus, her strength in reclaiming her life, and her decision to join the local advocacy group for seniors. The writer had captured her journey with an honesty that felt both empowering and humbling. The last line of the article stood out to her. Elaine's journey is a testament to the power of resilience, and a reminder that it's never too late to own your future. Elaine's chest tightened, but in a way that felt like release. Her story had made its way into the world in a way she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. Her voice had been heard, and now it would inspire others. A few weeks later, Mia came to visit again, holding a thick envelope in her hands. Elaine's heart skipped a beat, recognizing the logo of a local essay contest on the front. "I entered the contest, Grandma," Mia said, her voice steady but filled with excitement. "It's about people who inspire us. I wrote about you." Elaine's throat tightened, a lump forming as she read the title of Mia's essay, From Silence to Strength, My Grandma's Journey to Freedom. The essay, written in Mia's young but perceptive voice, detailed Elaine's fight, how she'd battled not just for the house, but for her right to be seen, to be heard. Mia had chronicled every detail, from the gloves Jenna had given Elaine, to the quiet resolve that had turned into undeniable power. Elaine couldn't help but smile through the rush of emotion, proud of the young woman Mia was becoming. "I'm so proud of you, Mia," Elaine whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You're already stronger than I ever was at your age." Mia smiled, her eyes shining with something deeper now, an understanding that went beyond just the words she had written. She had witnessed Elaine's transformation, and now she was sharing it with the world. The following month, Elaine received a letter from the community center. She opened it carefully, her heart racing as she saw the official-looking paper. Inside was a certificate for a local award, the Elder Resilience Award. She had won it for her work with the advocacy group and her willingness to share her story with others. The Adieu Pars letter praised her courage in the face of adversity and highlighted how her journey had inspired other seniors to take control of their lives. The award ceremony was held at the community center, and when Elaine stood to accept the plaque, the room erupted in applause. Carol was there, of course, clapping the loudest, her face beaming with pride. Elaine took the stage, her voice steady as she spoke to the crowd. "This award is not just for me," she said, her words clear and strong. "It's for all of us who have faced battles in silence, who have been told we're too old to matter, too invisible to change anything. We matter, and we can make a difference." The crowd cheered, and Elaine felt a deep, fulfilling sense of victory, one that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the power of reclaiming what was hers. Elaine's story, now widely known, was featured in the local paper. The headline was bold and unashamed. From toilet brush to title deed, one woman's journey to freedom. She stared at the headline for a long time, not because it surprised her, but because it felt right. Her story, her fight, it wasn't just about surviving in the shadows. It was about stepping into the light, about owning her life in a way she'd never thought possible. The article detailed everything, from the beginning of her struggle to the day she had planted flowers on her condo balcony. It spoke of her resilience, her decision to move forward when everything seemed impossible. And the last line of the article was the one that Elaine would carry with her forever. Elaine proves that no matter how small the start, a clean slate can lead to a life beyond your wildest dreams. Inspired by her journey, Elaine took the next step. She began teaching a budgeting class for widows at the community center. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about empowerment, about showing other women how to take control of their finances, their futures, their lives. She wasn't just teaching them to balance checkbooks. She was teaching them to balance their worth. As she prepared for her next class, Elaine's mind wandered to the unexpected change in her life, the way it had unfolded. Everything had felt out of her control at one point. But now, with each lesson she taught, each person she helped, the sense of ownership had grown. That evening, a letter arrived. Elaine opened it slowly, the neat handwriting on the envelope sending a wave of unease through her. It was unsigned. Inside, the words were simple, stark. "I'm sorry." Elaine set the letter down, her hands trembling for only a moment. She had no idea who had sent it, but she didn't need to. Jenna? Marcus? Someone else? The past would always find a way to creep back in. But this time, it was different. This time, the apology felt empty. The change she had made in her life was irreversible. She smiled softly, her mind clear. It didn't matter who had written it. She had already moved beyond their reach, and the future she had built was one they would never touch. The clean start she had feared to take was now her truth, and no one could take that away from her. Elaine sat quietly on her balcony, the soft hum of the world around her blending into the tranquil space she had created. Her garden bloomed with colors she hadn't anticipated, vibrant petals in reds, yellows, and purples, each flower a symbol of the care she had poured into this new chapter. The evening sun was slipping low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the city. And for a moment, it felt like the world had slowed down just for her. She sipped her tea, her eyes scanning the horizon, no longer searching for escape, but for peace. There was a calmness to her life now, a stillness that had taken years to cultivate. Every sip, every breath, every glance at the flowers that now graced her balcony, it all felt earned. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and the world around her felt like a quiet reflection of that. Inside, the walls of her condo were adorned with photos, framed snapshots from her life. Her, Mia, and Carol laughing together, faces glowing with warmth and connection. The images hung on the walls like small monuments to the strength she had built and the family she had found. She had once been invisible, lost in a house that never truly felt like home, but now, the memories she had created here, free of manipulation, free of obligation, were real, and they were hers. Elaine stood up slowly, the tea still warm in her hand, and walked back inside. She paused at her bathroom door, a quiet smile tugging at her lips. The bathroom gleamed, untouched by the grime that had once built up under the weight of her silence. The faucet sparkled, the mirrors clear, the floor shining brightly. For the first time in years, the room didn't feel like a place where she was forced to scrub away the mess of others. It was her space now, clean not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional one too. She could hear Carol's voice in her head, playful and knowing. "So what now, Elaine? What's next?" Elaine's smile softened, but there was no hesitation in her response, even if she said it to herself instead of to Carol. "I scrubbed nothing I didn't mess up." The words were a quiet declaration. She had learned that lesson long ago. No one would make her feel obligated to clean up their mess again. Not Jenna, not Marcus, not anyone. Her days of feeling responsible for other people's chaos were over. The next morning, a card arrived from Mia. It was simple, but in the quiet of her condo, the words felt like a quiet thunderclap. Elaine opened the envelope, careful not to tear it. and unfolded the card. "You gave me the strength to speak up." Elaine's breath caught. She had never imagined her own voice could inspire someone else to find theirs. The words felt like a gift, a confirmation that her fight hadn't just been for herself. It had been for something greater, for Mia, for other women like her, for every person who had been silenced. Elaine placed the card on the table in front of her and exhaled slowly. This was the legacy she had wanted to leave. It wasn't about the house, the money, or even the battles she had fought. It was about empowering others to do the same, to stand tall, to speak their truth, and to never let anyone make them feel less than what they were. She sat down and wrote her reply. Her hand moved slowly, the words coming without thought, without effort. "That's the only legacy I care about." She didn't need more. She had everything she needed in that moment. The knowledge that Mia had learned to stand up for herself, that she would carry this lesson forward, and that she had helped shape that. That was more than any house, any title deed, any victory in court. Later that afternoon, Elaine stood at the kitchen window, looking out over the city. The skyline stretched before her, bright and sprawling, a perfect mirror to the life she had created for herself. For the first time, she didn't feel small in the world. She felt like she had a place in it, a place where no one could diminish her or silence her again. She glanced over at the framed quote that sat on the windowsill. "I am not your maid. I am your consequence." The words had been there for a while now, but today they felt more fitting than ever. Her consequences had shaped her, had brought her to this place of peace, and she wouldn't apologize for it. She had been forced to clean up their mess for too long. Now, they were the ones left to face the consequences of their actions. A sudden thought flitted through her mind, and she couldn't help but smile at the irony of it. "She told me to clean her bathroom, so I cleaned her out of the house, and out of my life." It was a final thought that felt fitting, almost poetic in its simplicity. The mess they had left behind was no longer hers to clean. And just like that, she had reclaimed everything.